Anna Jenkins thought spending her last $3 on a stale turkey sandwich was just another low point in her miserable life. She was 22, broke, exhausted, and invisible to almost everyone on the streets of Hell's Kitchen. She had no idea that one desperate purchase at a rundown diner would put her directly in the path of New York's most ruthless crime boss. By morning, he would know her name. By the end of the week, walking away from him would no longer be an option. Pete's all-night diner sat on 9th Avenue under a flickering neon sign that buzzed over the wet pavement. It was 2:15 a.m., on a freezing Tuesday in November when Anna pushed through the glass doors, shivering inside her thin wool coat. She had just finished a brutal 14-hour double shift, her feet aching, her head pounding, and her body running on nothing but hunger and survival. All she wanted was something cheap enough to keep her standing. She did not know the man watching from the corner booth had already decided she was worth far more than $3. In her pocket sat exactly $3.42. It was the entirety of her tips for the night, a cruel joke after dealing with drunk tourists and angry locals. Her bank account was overdrawn, her rent was 2 weeks late, and her younger sister Chloe needed an inhaler refill by Friday. Before leaving the diner, Anna had purchased a day-old turkey and cheese sandwich from Pete, wrapped tightly in cling film, along with a bruised apple. It was meant to be her dinner and tomorrow's breakfast. Her stomach let out a hollow, painful growl as she walked down the deserted street, clutching the plastic bag to her chest like a lifeline. She turned down the narrow alleyway between 44th and 45th Street, a shortcut to her cramped walk-up apartment. The alley smelled of rotting cardboard, stale beer, and the sharp, unmistakable metallic tang of copper. Anna froze. The copper smell was fresh blood. A low, wet groan echoed from the shadows behind a rusted industrial dumpster. Anna's instincts, honed by 2 years of nursing school at NYU before the money ran out, screamed at her to run. This was Hell's Kitchen. You didn't investigate noises in the dark unless you wanted to become a chalk outline. But a second groan, weaker this time, rooted her to the spot. It sounded like a dying animal. Cautiously, she took a step forward, her cheap sneakers squelching in the puddles. "Don't take another step." The voice was a jagged rasp, laced with agony, but commanding an unnatural authority. Anna gasped. Slumped against the brick wall was a man. Even in the dim light, she could tell he didn't belong in this gutter. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than her college tuition, but the pristine fabric was ruined. His white dress shirt was soaked in a massive, spreading stain of dark crimson just below his ribs. In his right hand, trembling but deadly steady, was a suppressed matte black pistol aimed directly at her chest. I just wanted to help," Anna stammered, raising her hands, the plastic bag dangling from her wrist. "Walk away," the man ordered, his jaw clenched tight. "You didn't see anything. Walk." He tried to shift his weight, but the movement caused a sharp hiss to escape his lips. His head lolled back against the brickwork, the pistol dropping slightly. His face was pale, almost translucent in the moonlight, slick with a cold sweat. He was going into hypovolemic shock. Anna looked at the gun, then at his wound. Common sense begged her to flee, but the nurse inside her overrode the fear. "You're bleeding out," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "If that bullet nicked your liver, you have maybe 20 minutes before your heart stops." Before he could raise the weapon again, Anna dropped to her knees beside him. Up close, the man was terrifyingly handsome, sharp jawline, raven black hair plastered to his forehead, and eyes as cold and dark as the Atlantic Ocean. "Touch me and I'll kill you," he whispered. But his eyes were losing their focus. "Shut up," Anna muttered, surprising herself. She unbuttoned her coat and violently ripped the heavy cotton apron she was still wearing underneath. "I'm going to apply pressure. It's going to hurt." She pressed the wadded fabric hard against his abdomen. The man violently seized a guttural roar trapped in his throat as his free hand shot out, gripping Anna's wrist with bone-crushing force. He glared at her, breathing heavily, but she didn't flinch. She leaned her weight into her hands, stemming the arterial flow. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The rain soaked them both. Anna's knees were numb, her hands stained crimson. "Why are you doing this?" he breathed, his grip on her wrist slowly loosening. "Because nobody deserves to die next to a dumpster," Anna replied softly. She looked at his pale lips. "You're shivering, your blood pressure is dropping, and your blood sugar is crashing from the trauma." With one hand maintaining pressure, she reached over and tore open the plastic bag with her teeth. She pulled out the stale turkey sandwich and ripped the cling film away. "Eat this," she commanded, holding half the sandwich to his mouth. He stared at it, then at her. A flicker of dark amusement crossing his pain-stricken face. "Are you feeding me? Carbohydrates and protein. You need energy to keep your heart pumping until your people get here. I assume you have people coming." "They're coming," he confirmed quietly. He took a slow, agonizing bite of the sandwich. It was dry and tasteless, but he forced it down. Anna watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed, realizing in a surreal daze that she was feeding her only meal to an armed, bleeding stranger in an alleyway. After he finished the half, he looked at her with an unreadable expression. "What's your name?" "You don't need to know that," Anna said quickly. She heard the distant, distinct squeal of tires turning onto 9th Avenue. Heavy engines, multiple vehicles. "Your ride is here." She grabbed his hand, large, calloused, and freezing, and pressed it against the blood-soaked apron on his stomach. "Keep holding this. Don't let go." Anna stood up, stumbling back a step. She looked at her bloodied hands, panic finally setting in. She had touched a mobster. She had left her fingerprints on his clothes. "Wait," he called out, his voice slightly stronger now, but Anna didn't wait. She turned and sprinted down the alley, disappearing into the labyrinth of the city just as the high beams of 3 black SUVs swept into the narrow brick corridor. 3 weeks had passed since the night in the alley. Anna scrubbed her hands raw every night, but in her dreams, she could still smell the copper. She had scoured the local newspapers and online obituaries expecting to see a headline about a murdered gang boss in Hell's Kitchen, but there was nothing. The city had swallowed the bleeding man whole just as it swallowed everyone else. However, Anna soon had much bigger problems than the ghost of an alleyway stranger. It was a Tuesday evening. Anna was in her small apartment, helping 8-year-old Chloe with her math homework at the battered kitchen table. The radiators hissed weakly, failing to fight off the December chill. Suddenly, a thunderous pounding shook the front door. Before Anna could even stand, the flimsy deadbolt gave way with a splintering crack. The door flew open, hitting the drywall with a violent bang. Chloe screamed, covering her ears. 4 men stepped into the small living room. They weren't cops. They wore cheap leather jackets, smelled of stale tobacco, and carried themselves with the heavy, blunt menace of street-level enforcers. At the front of the pack was Mickey Sullivan. Mickey was a mid-level loan shark who operated out of an illegal gambling den in Queens. He had a scarred lip and a reputation for breaking fingers with a ball-peen hammer. "Hello, Anna." Mickey sneered, his eyes scanning the pathetic apartment. "Place is a real dump. Where's your old man?" Anna pushed Chloe behind her, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I told you last month, Mickey. My father ran out on us a year ago. I don't know where Thomas is and I don't care." "Well, that's a damn shame," Mickey said, stepping closer, his heavy boots crunching on the splintered wood of the doorframe. "Because Thomas owes my boss $50,000, and since he decided to play hide-and-seek, that debt passes to his next of kin." "That's you, sweetheart. I don't have $50,000. I don't even have $50, Anna shouted, her voice trembling. "Leave us alone." Mickey sighed, a cruel smile twisting his scarred lip. He gestured to his men. "Grab the kid." "No!" Anna lunged forward as 2 men grabbed her arms, pinning her back against the kitchen counter. A 3rd man grabbed Chloe, lifting the screaming child into the air. "Let her go," Anna sobbed, struggling wildly against her captors. "You're going to come work for us, Anna," Mickey said, stepping into her personal space, his foul breath making her stomach churn. "We got a few underground clubs. You're a pretty girl. You'll work off your daddy's debt on your back. The kid goes to a foster home unless you can write me a check right now." Anna spat in his face. Mickey wiped the saliva from his cheek, his eyes going dead. He raised his hand, balling it into a massive fist to strike her. Anna squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the bone-shattering impact. But the blow never came. Instead, a chilling, perfectly calm voice echoed from the broken doorway. "Put your hands on her, Mickey. And I'll make sure you spend the rest of your short life begging for a bullet." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mickey froze. The thugs holding Anna stiffened, their eyes darting to the doorway. The man holding Chloe slowly set the child down. Anna opened her eyes. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 towering men in tailored suits, was him. The stranger from the alley. He was fully healed, impeccably dressed in a midnight blue 3-piece suit, an expensive cashmere overcoat draped over his shoulders. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he leaned casually against a silver-tipped walking cane. He radiated absolute power, control, and a terrifying lethal grace. Mickey Sullivan swallowed hard, all the color draining from his face. "Mr. Moretti, I didn't know you had business in this part of town. Moretti." Anna's blood ran cold. Emmanuel Moretti, the undisputed head of the Moretti crime syndicate. He was a phantom, a myth whispered about by the criminal underworld, a man who controlled half the politicians and all the ports on the eastern seaboard. "I have business wherever I please." "Mickey," Emmanuel said softly, stepping into the apartment. His dark abyssal eyes flicked to Anna, lingering on her for a fraction of a second before locking onto the loan shark. "And my current business is wondering why you are passing in Miss Jenkins's home. Her father, Thomas. He owes our crew 50 grand. Mickey stammered, taking a step back. "We're just collecting. Thomas Jenkins is dead," Emmanuel stated smoothly. "He was found in the East River 2 days ago, shot in the back of the head." "Did you know that?" Anna gasped, her hand to her mouth. Even though her father had abandoned them, the finality of the news hit her like a physical blow. "No, sir," Mickey said, shaking his head rapidly. "I swear." Emmanuel took a slow, deliberate step toward Mickey. "And since he is dead, his debt is null and void. Yet here you are, terrifying a young woman and a child." Before Mickey could formulate an apology, Emmanuel moved with terrifying speed. He swung the heavy, silver-tipped cane upward, cracking it brutally across Mickey's kneecap. A sickening snap echoed through the room. Mickey shrieked, collapsing to the floor in a pathetic heap. The 3 other thugs raised their hands instantly in surrender, backing away. Emmanuel's men didn't even draw their weapons. They just watched with bored indifference. "Take this trash out of my sight," Emmanuel commanded without looking back. "If I see any of you in Hell's Kitchen again, you won't leave breathing." The thugs scrambled to drag a whimpering Mickey out the door, vanishing down the stairwell as fast as their legs could carry them. Silence descended upon the tiny apartment, broken only by Chloe's quiet crying. Anna rushed to her sister, pulling her into a desperate hug. Emmanuel stood in the center of the room, using a crisp white handkerchief to wipe a speck of dust off his cane. He looked completely out of place in her shabby living room. He looked like a king standing in a hovel. "You look better," Anna whispered, finding her voice. Emmanuel's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smirk. "And you look just as exhausted as the night you gave me half a turkey sandwich. You knew who I was. It took my men exactly 4 hours to trace you." "Anna Jenkins," Emmanuel said, taking a step closer. The scent of expensive cologne and danger rolled off him. "You dropped your diner receipt in the alley. It had the last 4 digits of your debit card on it." Anna stood up, keeping Chloe behind her. "You paid me back. You saved us from Mickey. Thank you. Now, please leave." Emmanuel chuckled, a dark, velvety sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "I didn't come here to save you, Anna. I came here to claim you." Anna's heart stopped. "What?" Emmanuel's eyes turned hard, stripping away the brief warmth. "I owe you my life. That is an undeniable fact. But do you know why I was bleeding out in that alleyway 3 weeks ago?" Anna shook her head, terrified by the shift in his demeanor. "Because of your father," Emmanuel said coldly. "Thomas Jenkins didn't just owe Mickey Sullivan money. He owed a massive gambling debt to the Romano family. To pay it off, he sold me out. He gave them the location of my private meeting that night. He set the ambush that put a bullet in my stomach." Anna felt the room spin. "No, my father was a coward, but he did." Emmanuel interrupted, stepping into her personal space, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. He reached out his warm, calloused fingers, gently but firmly, tilting her chin up so she had to look him in the eyes. "Your father tried to kill me, Anna, but you saved me. The universe demands balance. Blood for blood. You said he's dead," Anna whispered, tears of fear welling in her eyes. "His debt is paid. His debt to Mickey is dead," Emmanuel corrected softly, his thumb brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "His debt to me is monumental, and since you are his blood, that debt is now yours." "What do you want from me?" she breathed. Emmanuel leaned in, his lips hovering inches from her ear. "Everything. Pack a bag for you and the child. You don't live here anymore. You belong to me now." The Moretti estate on the north shore of Long Island looked more like a fortress than a home. It was a sprawling neoclassical mansion of gray stone and black iron, surrounded by a double layer of high gates and acres of dense woods. For Anna and Chloe, it was a sudden, jarring transition from the suffocating poverty of Hell's Kitchen to a world of silent, terrifying luxury. Emmanuel had given them an entire wing of the second floor. Chloe had a bedroom filled with plush toys, a canopy bed, and a private tutor who arrived every morning at 9. The little girl, insulated by her youth, saw it as a fairy tale. Anna saw it for exactly what it was, a beautifully decorated cage. She sat at the edge of her massive king-sized bed, staring out the arched windows at the gray Atlantic waves crashing against the cliffs below. It had been 2 weeks since Emmanuel had dragged them from their apartment. In that time, she had only seen him at dinner. Every night at precisely 8 p.m., a silent, unsmiling maid named Rosemary would bring Anna a stunning designer dress. Every night Anna was expected to walk down the grand spiral staircase to the formal dining room where Emmanuel sat at the head of a mahogany table long enough to host a Senate hearing. He didn't touch her. He didn't lock her in a cellar. Instead, he subjected her to a psychological warfare of absolute civility. He asked about Chloe's studies, commented on the wine, and spoke to her with the polite deference of a gentleman courting a lady. But beneath it all lay the immutable truth. If she tried to leave the guards at the perimeter, Gates would stop her. If she ran, he would find her. The heavy oak door to her bedroom clicked open without a knock. Anna braced herself, expecting Rosemary. But it was Emmanuel who stepped inside. He had discarded his suit jacket, his crisp white shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms, exposing the dark, intricate tattoos of vines and thorns that crawled up his wrists. "You didn't touch your lunch," Emmanuel said, his deep voice cutting through the silence of the room. He walked over to the velvet armchair opposite her bed and sat down, crossing one leg over the other. "I'm not hungry," Anna replied, refusing to look at him. "I'm not an animal in a zoo, Emmanuel. You can't just throw food at me and expect me to be happy. You fed me when I was starving," he noted calmly. "I am simply returning the favor at a much higher quality." Anna finally snapped her gaze to him. "Why am I here, truly? You have thousands of people who can cook for you, clean for you, or whatever else it is you want. If my father is dead and you wanted revenge, you should have just left us to Mickey Sullivan. Why keep us here?" Emmanuel leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because you are the only authentic thing in my world, Anna. Everyone in my life wants something from me. They want my money, my power, or my death. But you looked at a bleeding armed monster in a gutter, gave him your last meal, and asked for nothing in return. I am a superstitious man. The men in my family do not let go of their good luck charms. I am not a charm," Anna yelled, standing up. "I am a human being. I have a life. I had a career I was trying to build. A career as a waitress making $12 an hour while your sister suffocates because you can't afford her medicine." Emmanuel's voice remained dangerously soft, but the words cut deep. "Your old life was killing you, Anna. I simply accelerated the ending." Before Anna could fire back an angry response, the heavy wooden doors of the mansion's front entrance slammed open downstairs. The echo traveled up the grand stairwell, followed by the urgent, frantic shouting of men. Emmanuel's demeanor changed instantly. The casual, relaxed posture vanished, replaced by the rigid, lethal tension of a predator sensing a threat. He stood up, his hand automatically reaching into his waistband for his firearm. A sharp knock rattled Anna's door. It was Dominic, Emmanuel's trusted underboss and lifelong friend. Dominic's face was pale, his tie slightly askew. "Boss," Dominic said, breathing heavily. "We have a problem, a big one. The Romano family. They just hit our warehouse in Brooklyn, but that's not all. There's someone downstairs you need to see. Someone who shouldn't be alive." Emmanuel flicked a glance at Anna, a silent warning to stay put before striding out of the room. Anna's heart pounded. The Romano family, the people her father had supposedly sold Emmanuel out to. Curiosity and fear warred within her, but the sheer panic in Dominic's voice made her move. Waiting until the men's footsteps faded down the hall, she slipped out of her room and crept down the long carpeted corridor, peering over the gilded balustrade of the grand staircase. Down in the marble foyer, standing between two heavily armed Moretti guards, was a man covered in dirt and dried blood. He was shivering, his clothes tattered, his face bruised beyond recognition. Anna gasped, pressing her hands over her mouth to stifle the scream. It was Thomas Jenkins, her father. "You told me he was dead." Anna's scream tore through the cavernous marble foyer. She bolted out of her room, sprinting down the grand staircase, her silk gown flying behind her. Emmanuel was faster. He lunged his thick arm, wrapping around her wrist, stopping her dead before she could reach the battered, bleeding man kneeling on the floor. "Let me go. He's my father." Anna sobbed, thrashing against Emmanuel's unyielding chest. Thomas Jenkins lifted his head. His face was a horrific mess of swollen purple flesh and crusted blood. "Anna, oh God, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing, Thomas," Emmanuel rumbled. His voice was a deadly vibrating baritone that sucked the oxygen from the room. He shot a freezing glare at his underboss. "Explain, Dominic." Dominic shifted uneasily. "The Romanos faked the execution, boss. Dumped a John Doe with Thomas's ID in the river. They've been keeping him chained in a queen's basement for 3 weeks. Why?" The single word from Emmanuel was a physical threat. "Because I didn't sell you out," Thomas cried, his voice breaking. He slumped forward, coughing violently. "I swear on my life, Emmanuel. Yes, I owed them 50 grand. They threatened to butcher Anna and Chloe if I didn't give them your routes. But I lied. I gave them a decoy address, an empty warehouse on 33rd Street. The foyer fell deathly silent. Emmanuel's grip on Anna tightened. "If you gave them a decoy, Thomas, how did the Romano hit squad know I would be bleeding out in that alley on 9th Avenue? Because they already had a rat inside your crew." Thomas wept, his shoulders shaking. "They used my gambling debt to frame me. They knew your exact route because someone at your own table told them. They threw me out of a van at your gates tonight so you'd kill me and never look for the real traitor." Anna felt a violent tremor rock Emmanuel's massive body. He slowly released her, his polished shoes clicking against the marble as he approached Thomas. "Dominic," Emmanuel said, his tone entirely hollow. "Who knew my route that night?" "Only 3 men, boss. You, me, and Christopher." Christopher, Emmanuel's younger cousin, the boy he had raised, protected, and treated as a brother for 15 years. At that exact moment, the heavy mahogany study doors swung open. Christopher strolled out, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. He looked at the bleeding man on the floor with detached, arrogant amusement. "You aren't actually going to believe this junkie, are you, Emmanuel? He's just trying to save his miserable hide." Emmanuel didn't turn around. He just stared at the marble floor. "The warehouse in Brooklyn that got hit tonight, Christopher. The Romanos bypassed the master alarms. Only 2 people had those bypass codes. You and me. I never changed them because I trusted you." Christopher's smug smirk vanished. His eyes darted to the front doors, but Emmanuel's heavily armed guards had already shifted, blocking all the exits. "Emmanuel, wait," Christopher stammered, raw panic bleeding into his voice. "You're taking a street rat's word over your own blood? Family doesn't put a bullet in my stomach," Emmanuel whispered. He turned his dark eyes ablaze with a terrifying, unholy wrath. "And family absolutely does not use an innocent woman and child as a shield." Christopher panicked. He drew a suppressed pistol from his jacket sleeve, aiming it directly at Emmanuel's chest. Emmanuel moved like a phantom. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply struck. His large hand clamped over Christopher's wrist, twisting with a sickening, audible snap. The gun hit the floor. Christopher shrieked in agony as Emmanuel slammed him against the stone pillar, his hand closing around his cousin's throat and lifting him entirely off his feet. "I gave you the world." Emmanuel roared, the absolute heartbreak of a betrayed king fracturing his stoic mask. "They promised me half the city." Christopher choked out, clawing at Emmanuel's iron grip. "They promised you a grave." Emmanuel snarled. He tossed Christopher to the floor like garbage and looked at Dominic. "Take him to the soundproof room downstairs. Keep him breathing. I want the name of every Romano soldier involved before dawn." As Christopher was dragged away screaming, the foyer returned to a suffocating quiet. Thomas had passed out from pure exhaustion. Emmanuel turned his back to Anna, staring blindly at the grand doors. "Your father is innocent of the ambush," he said, his voice completely dead. "His debt is forgiven. My doctors will heal him and I will fund his relocation far from New York." Anna took a trembling step forward. "And Chloe and me? Your debt is paid," Emmanuel said softly, refusing to look at her. "You are free. Dominic will set you up in a Manhattan penthouse fully funded for 5 years. Your nursing tuition is paid. You have your life back." He began to walk away, retreating into the lonely shadows of his massive fortress. He was a ruthless monster, but in that moment Anna saw the agonizing isolation of the crown he bore. The winter wind howled through the open doors, offering her the exact freedom she had prayed for. She could leave the blood of the Mafia and the terror behind, but looking at his retreating silhouette, Anna realized the terrifying truth. She didn't want a life anymore. This dangerous man had given Anna something no one else ever had: protection, loyalty, and a devotion so absolute it scared her almost as much as it saved her. "Emmanuel," she called. The crime boss stopped. Anna stepped across the blood-stained marble, leaving the life that had starved her behind. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Chloe loves her tutor, and I still haven't finished making you dinner." Emmanuel turned slowly. For once, the cold mask was gone. What remained was the man beneath it, ruthless to the world, but dangerously gentle with her. He crossed the room and cupped her face in his hands. "If you stay, Anna," he said quietly, "there is no going back. You belong to my world now." Anna looked into the eyes of the man everyone feared and did not move away. "I know," she whispered, wrapping her arms around him. "But at least I'll never be hungry again." Anna Jenkins had walked into a diner with $3, empty pockets, and no one waiting for her. She never expected one desperate act of kindness to pull her into the arms of New York's most dangerous man. But in a world built on betrayal, Emmanuel gave her the one thing she had been denied her entire life: a place to belong. If Anna and Emmanuel's dark romance kept you watching, hit like, share this story with someone who loves dangerous love and mafia obsession, and subscribe for more stories where broken women find power in the shadows.